One of the things that you've really worked on in your time as CEO, and I think even before this, was changing the culture of GM, partly to get realizations like this and the science and improvements to spread across GM more quickly. Is that part of the reason why you might want to change the culture?
Well, we've been on a journey. I think it's well known that I've been at General Motors most of my whole career. Worked at a grocery store before then, but I think there was things and aspects to change. We've been on that journey for quite some time, but really making sure people are engaged, that they can bring their best ideas to the table, that we work together. Because unlike a lot of other companies that are in the Fortune top 10, we do one thing. We make cars, trucks, and crossovers, and the services that support those. So how do we get everyone engaged, working together, and bringing the best ideas forward? That's the culture, we're continuously striving to provide. We've made great strides, but yeah, we have more work to do.
You've been at GM for 35 years. It's so often in the case where a company's culture needs to change that the board decides to bring in an outsider. GM has tried this a number of times. And so often, the insider is the person that is, the culture shapes a person rather than a person shaping the culture necessarily. What's it like to try to change a company that you have been such a part of? How do you get the company, how do you know what needs to change, and how do you get that company to change?
Well, but if you think about what forms the culture of a company, so why you have an opinion of General Motors, chances are you got that by talking to people who either closely, that work for GM over time or work closely with GM. So generally the people in the company know what needs to change. And so, I grew up saying, and actually driving a lot of change. So one of the reasons, as we went through the restructuring in the 08-09 timeframe, I was asked to lead HR is because I'd been involved in so many initiatives to really engage employees. And so I think it was a natural. So I think and the other thing, I think people make this insider-outsider designation of who's going to be more effective, which frankly, whether you came from within or without, to me is not the most important dimension. It's what's your leadership style? How are you going to challenge everybody? How well do you understand the way it works to really make change and make sure no one can BS you about what's really happening? You need to know. And so, again, I feel I have tremendous support from our employees across the globe because I've worked in so many different areas. They know me. They know, I champion doing the right thing, being fair, and I want to hear their ideas. I mean, when an employee calls me, and I get emails all the time, and they'll say, well, I was thinking about this. I'm like, okay, well, what have you done with it? Telling me is probably the least effective thing, but have you talked to your boss? Have you worked on a prototype? Have you submitted this idea? Have you gone and talked to so-and-so? So a lot of what I do is cheerlead everybody to do what they want to do because, everyone... One of the things I think I just continue to be impressed with is just the quality of the men and women at General Motors and their passion for our industry.
Mm-hmm. And when you send an email back and say to them, all right, what are you doing about that? How do you make sure that it's one thing to be in the forefront and saying you have to change, go and lead this, be entrepreneurial. Right. How do you make sure, number one, they're actually doing it, and number two, that the managers above them are letting them take on the projects that they want to take on? Because
I put a sentence at the end of it that says, let me know how it goes.
Uh-huh. And do you really want that kind of feedback?
I do. And so they let me know how it goes. And, and again, I don't want volumes. I know a lot of our employees at General Motors are avid LinkedIn participants. But and if it doesn't go well, I'll tell people, hey, if your boss isn't being responsive, then go to your boss's boss, or challenge your boss on this. No one comes to work and wants to do a bad job. And so, but just to let me know how it goes. I may hear from them in 2 weeks. I may hear from them in 2 months. But they know I mean it.
So that's from the bottoms up. That's getting people to be more bottoms up oriented. How do you also break down silos? Because I know one of the things is Steve Ratner talked about when he helped reorganize GM after the bailout was that this was a culture where there was the GM nod, where everyone would nod and say, yes, absolutely, we're going to do that, and nothing would get done. People didn't like breaking out of their silos. First, is that a fair characterization?
In pockets, I would say in my whole 35 years at GM, I never accepted the GM nod. If somebody said to me they were going to do something, I expect you to do it. And if you didn't do it, I'd be at your desk, at your, with an email, whatever, just challenging. So a lot of that is just not accepting that behavior because it's never been acceptable. But how do we really work across the organization better? One of the things, and this didn't come from me, it came from, I got our top 300 leaders across the globe together, and we talked about how can we be more effective, because it's got to be leader-led, we've got to model. We can't say, do this, but if they're not seeing us do it, it's not going to happen. And one of our employees actually from South America said, we have to own each other's problems. Think about the power of that. If we own each other's problems, and that means if you've got a problem, I've got to solve your problem just as much as I've got to solve my own. And that's what we all challenged ourselves to do, and I see evidence of it everywhere. So I think it's things like that that then change the story, so whether you're in the company or working closely with it, you can say, wow, GM, is a different place. It's a place where, I have an idea and I'm heard and it's valued. And that's what we work hard for every day.
Do you think that some of these changes will, when you look at the massive recalls that you've gone through and that you are still going through, and of changing the culture to not just make a faster GM, but also one where these kind of problems won't exist, do you think that you have changed GM in a way that you won't have the same kind of issues that have happened before, the 30 million recalled vehicles, that is part of the past?
Absolutely, the change we made. I think we are a different company. We're a stronger and a better company because of what we went through last year. And I think it demonstrates our commitment to the customer, because we went well back into times looking at vehicles that were designed in the mid-'90s and built in the late '90s to make sure if we were understood there could potentially be an issue. These are vehicles that had been out in, for 12, 13, 14 years in some cases, never have a field incident. We still took action. So, that was the kind of thoroughness and commitment we demonstrated. I would also say Mark Royce, our head of product development, he has looked outside the industry to say, how do we make sure that we're building the safest vehicles possible? So our goal is to be the safety leader, and we're really driving a zero defect mentality. So we've benchmarked the nuclear navy, the military, the aerospace, industries that have, people have a different perception of than they have auto, and we've taken those learnings and incorporated into our vehicle development process. So I'm, very confident the changes we made are going to lead and started implementing last year and look back. So I'm convinced and committed that the work that we're doing now is going to lead to much better vehicles. But again, I also think we showed great responsibility as we worked through last year. So. And our employees owned it. Mm-hmm.
And is there when you talk about the benchmarking and of doing this kind of thorough review, is there a cultural change that has to happen though also? I assume that GM employees never wanted to have defects. That
exactly.
You always took pride in your job. You want to make sure that you're doing things the right way.
Right.
How do you make sure that there's a culture though where you go beyond that? How are you making sure that you don't just have the right systems in place, but the right beliefs among your employees?
Well, that was one of the reasons why we shared so vividly what had happened with our whole employee base and challenged ourselves to make sure something, I told employees, I never want to forget this because I want to make sure it never happens again. And again, they've owned it. One great example is we implemented a Speak Up for Safety program. We actually celebrate people bringing issues forward. So in case they're like, does somebody really want me to? Yes, I want you to raise your hand, and we're going to recognize you for doing that. And your point, you said it earlier, people don't come to work and want to do a bad job. Engineers want to do their that's their passion. That's why they pursued engineering. So putting a system in place that allows them to do great work to begin with, the changes Mark Royce has made, putting a system in place that if they see an issue, what I really want to do is walk across the aisle and say, hey, I got this issue. Or if they feel it's outside their area and they're hesitant for whatever reason, they have a mechanism to do that. But then, really be on this journey to take all that creative engineering and really work to zero defects. They're engaged. But I would say the other part of the system Mark put in place is there's checks and balances. Because an engineer may thought they did their very best work, but how do we validate? How do we test? How do we look at it from a subsystems perspective to make sure? That's what we've done.
I heard a great quote you gave, maybe about a year ago, where you talked about the idea of getting people in meetings to argue more. Mm-hmm. This was one of your passions. This was something you thought was important. Why is that so important?
Well, car development is very complicated, and just the 30,000 parts on a vehicle that we're integrating. And now, when you look at how it was one thing that were complicated when it was all mechanical systems, but look how much of the mechanical systems have been replaced with electronics. Even more important to do all the testing. when you look at the customers we serve around the globe, and what a customer wants in India may be different than Sao Paulo, than New York, how do we make sure we understand that customer? So one of General Motors' strengths is we grew up that way. We have people from all around the world who understand local customers, who have different experiences with technology. If we can get in a room and really, argue it out constructively, and everybody's views get on the table, we'll make better decisions. One person does not have all the information or all the experiences to be able to say, I know exactly what the customer in this country wants versus this country. So if we can get all of that, the benefit of the experience and the wealth of knowledge that collectively GM possesses, we will make better cars, better decisions, and provide more value for the customer.
And how do you pull that off? How do you get people who either are introverted and they don't want to speak out, or they feel like it's someone who is smarter than them or above their rank is the one talking, and they'll look like they're being, making this person angry by speaking up? How are you getting people to actually raise their voices if they don't feel comfortable doing it or if they think it's going to hurt them?
Well, first of all, I think it's by modeling that behavior. And so, not only myself, but, our whole, broad leadership team, we've talked about this. And we want to make sure, good ideas don't have hierarchy. And so, ideas should be able to come from anywhere and should be respected. And so we've got to earn the trust of every single employee by demonstrating it the way we behave. I mean, many times I'll be like, hey, here's my idea, but this could be bad. So, make it better. I mean, that's one of the things I say a lot is, okay, I have this idea, now make it better. And it's giving that permission. And people, you only have to do it once or twice and they know you mean it, and then it starts to happen naturally.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Sure, it's been a lot of fun.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.